Welcome to the first Pakistan at 100 podcast. My name is Ali Hasnain. I'm an assistant professor of economics at the Lahore University of Management and Sciences, where we're holding this first event. It's a pleasure to be joined by our outgoing Vice Chancellor, Dr. Sohail H. Naqvi. Dr. Naqvi has spent the last few decades in various positions of authority within the higher education sector in Pakistan. He was the Dean of the Faculty of Electronics at the Khan Institute of Technology. He was for 8 years the Executive Director of the Higher Education Commission and has been for the last 5 years the Vice Chancellor here at LUMS. Dr. Naqvi is now leaving to extend his mission beyond the borders of Pakistan. He's the founding director in a few days, will be the founding director of the University of Central Asia. I think it's appropriate that we're starting this podcast series, which is meant to look at where our future can go as a country on the topic of education. I think one of the least controversial statements you can make about policy is that you have to fix education. It is at least necessary, if not sufficient condition, to start the journey on the path of progress. And so I want to have this discussion on what ails the higher education sector, what are our strengths, and where we can go from here. So Dr. Naqvi, thank you for joining us, first of all.
My pleasure.
When we talk about education, one of the first pieces of information we have to think about is the lack of a strong literacy rate. We have about 59% literacy in Pakistan compared to more than 70% in India, more than 90% in China. But having said that, even when you have a low primary or secondary education, there is an argument for strengthening your tertiary education because that sort of puts you on the path to research and development and to sort of high-paying jobs and so on. In that sector, we are still not doing too great. We're ranked 124th out of 140 countries in higher education. We have only one country in the top 500 universities of the world, and a very small fraction of our secondary of people that we educate till secondary level go on to college, and this compares sort of disfavorably to countries around the world. So in the developed world, about 30 to 40% of the population are college graduates, and in Pakistan it's 7%. So a lot has to be done. Now the question is, and I want to sort of open this up to hear from you generally about what you think are the major problems that have held us back from potentially being at a higher plane than we're at, and what you think our strengths are, perhaps strengths that enough attention isn't paid to.
Okay, this is a huge question that you have asked, because you started out with the education sector and then moved on to the higher education sector. Well, that's education sector by itself actually is inclusive of higher education. So in education, as far as literacy is concerned, we must be one of the very few countries in the world where that question is even relevant. I mean, because to have a country in the 21st century where the populace is not literate is just sort of unheard of. And there literally are going to be very few countries that are left in the situation that we are in. And then also, almost the entire world has the primary education sector covered, whereas we don't. Neither in terms of access to primary education, which simply do not have enough schools, nor in terms of quality, in terms of the outcomes that we expect from a primary, well-functioning primary education sector. So in that environment, the first question that is normally asked, well, then do we have need for a higher education emphasis? And the response to that is, who exactly is going to worry about this problem, and who exactly is going to do something about this problem? Because all teachers are products of higher education systems. So if you have a 1:30 ratio and you have 30 million children out of school, then you need 1 million teachers. It's very straightforward in that regards. We have not only an access problem at the education sector and a quality problem, we also have a structural problem that beyond, and we also, I would add to it, a language problem. Structural in the sense that once you move beyond the primary sector, you move into the secondary education, and then you move into the 4 grades sort of before you graduate from high school. In that, you do have streaming that takes place, and you need to have an introduction into the vocational sector and the technical education sector. Now that in its entirety doesn't exist. Now I'm using sort of extreme words because I'm speaking about it from a statistical point of view. I'm not talking about 10, 20 or 100 organizations that may be providing that. So there is one very large gap in our education sector. Then of course the quality aspect of it. So what impact that has on the higher education sector is that from an input point of view, you only have access to a very small cohort, and of that cohort you have access to only a much smaller percentage that is actually able to benefit from higher education. Then the same problem that exists at the education sector of a structural level exists at the higher education level also. We have assumed in Pakistan, primarily because of the work of the HEC, that higher education means university. Actually, higher education means colleges, community colleges, and also the higher technical education institutions. In the presence of a non-functional community college, that means our colleges are actually mini universities. They are simply preparing you to go to university. They're not preparing you to go to life. Sure. or be functional. So we have a severe problem over there as well. So that is the baggage that gets you into the higher education sector. So when we started to look at that sector in 2000, when there was a task force formed and the government was very keen to look at the issue. So of course we faced this huge battle. Why should the government invest in higher education? And so we kept answering the question, who is going to create all your policies relating to every aspect of life? Mm-hmm. Health, minerals, petroleum, climate change, what is going to happen? So without indigenous knowledge, you are then at the mercy of consultants. And nobody, from no matter what their qualification, can be parachuted down from anywhere in the world to figure out what is going to take to make things work. You can bring in the best policies, and one should definitely look at them, but the application on the ground is dependent upon local conditions. So that is the reason that you need a vibrant, dynamic higher education sector which can pay great dividends to the country, besides the fact that it can have, that this is the knowledge economy, that people can make a huge difference. You can have enhancement in exports, you can strengthen your defense, you can go on and on, the list goes on and on.
So one of the first ports of call when you look for a diagnosis of the problem is how much we expend on the tertiary education sector.
Yes.
So Pakistan as a total, as a percentage of GDP spends about 2.2% on education.
Yeah.
India spends 2.4% on tertiary education alone, and spends about 4.5% overall. China spends about 4% again. You must have had these conversations over the course of your career with sort of policy planners on how to move the needle up.
Yeah.
Where are we going wrong?
Well, Pakistan was spending, it started out at about 0.2% of GDP on higher education, and it went up to about 0.35% of GDP. We had these discussions, and the government said yes, they were all gung-ho that we are going to increase allocation to education. So if you recall, there was in 2003 the Act of Parliament passed Fiscal Responsibility and Debt Limitation Act, which said that in 10 years we're going to double allocation to education and health. And at that point, we were also at about 2.3%. There were also specific offices of the government that actually collected statistics and published them. And those were credible numbers. Since then, the needle has never really wavered from 2 to 2.2, 2.3. Most of the time we actually don't have good statistics, but whatever it is, it's definitely not 3 and not 4.
Sure.
The problem is that the voice in support of education simply doesn't exist in the parliament. Mm-hmm. It's a bad statement to make, but that's just the reality, that what it is. And so with nobody championing it, it just gets left by the wayside. We are not actually a country short in resources, and 0.1% of Pakistan's GDP is actually a significant amount of money. We could make a lot of difference. And rather than always having these stratospheric objectives, that we'll go 8%, like Vietnam did or something, we don't say that, okay, next year we will have 0.25% extra. And then if you keep on doing it for 5 years, you'll make a difference. We don't do that. So the allocation never increased, and it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. There was another very significant problem, and that is the control of bureaucracy over education. The primary essential purpose of the education department has become that of postings and transfers. It's the sum total. It is how influence is bartered in Pakistan. You have the ministers, you have relatives, you have friends, you have whatever acquaintances. All they want to do is this person transferred from this post, and this is what is going on. The whole aspect of quality, the technical aspect of curriculum, pedagogy, learning, etc., just forgot. And you do not have the technical expertise in the people who run the system to understand what is the issue and then to do something about it. And then on top of that, we have compounded it with this idea that English is our salvation. Mm-hmm. There is no country in the world, I believe, that offers primary education and doesn't offer it in the mother tongue.
Sure.
And we have treated English as if it is our salvation, as a part of our religion, rather than a very important language that everybody should know. Mm-hmm. Knowing a language well is very different to actually being the medium of instruction in which everything happens.
So there's an argument that education scholars that I know make about making sure that the medium of instruction is the mother tongue for early childhood learning and for primary education.
Yes.
But surely the case for mother tongue usage is diminished at the higher level. And the benefit of having having English training is that it unlocks sort of access to science literature, to literature in any discipline that you pick.
I will still repeat, it's a question of just knowing the language. Yes, it does that, but it is at the cost of expression. Mm-hmm. Even at LUMS, we are hiring the creme, we get the creme de la creme, we get the best, superbly trained students. If you were to ask them to express themselves in English or Urdu, there is a significant number who will have far greater expression in Urdu, and yet they are limited because they are not allowed to write the paper in Urdu. And also you have to look at the world. Norway, Malaysia, Thailand, Turkey, Indonesia. Which country in the world doesn't offer education in their own language?
Sure.
So, and now we have the advantage of technology. You have Google Translate. It can translate anything and everything. Is fast. The machines are becoming better. AI is in play. why are we so scared about all of this thing, and why don't we bring it into play?
So let me make this argument though. If it's the case that with time technology is going to diminish the gap, if you will, between languages, then perhaps the language problem will become moot in any case, certainly within the next 30-year time horizon.
It is possible.
Presumably. But in any case, if you were to, if I were to put you on the spot and say, what are the top 3 problems with higher education? Would language be one of them?
Yes, language would be one of them, because you have to understand, within higher education, you have to separate it by subjects. Mm-hmm. As far as science and engineering is concerned, language doesn't really play mm-hmm. that much of a role mm-hmm. because people have enough command of the language and they can get their way through. As far as humanities and social sciences is concerned, which actually defines the ethos of a nation, it defines your character, it is the protector of your heritage, it is your history, it is your passion, your expression, who you are, it's your identity. There we have a problem. And the problems that Pakistan is facing do not have to do with the fact that we have too few people who are able to solve circular vessel functions. Mm-hmm. We have a question of identity, something very, very deep across the country. We have issues of terrorism, of lack of understanding of religion, of ethnic divide. That is what is tearing the fabric of our country. Mm-hmm. And primarily, the purpose of education is to address the issues that the country is facing. So at this time, I would say it is a very big challenge, and it is something that needs to be given prominence.
That's an interesting point. It's contrary to what seems to be the flow of public opinion, because STEM education has become regarded as the future, in part because of the rise of AI, computer science more generally. And it's thought that perhaps to sort of future-proof yourself, a nation must ensure extremely significant training and emphasis on science and technology. And here you seem to be making the claim that, at least in part, you have to emphasize more perhaps humanities and social sciences to identify what we are as a country.
No, I am not diminishing the role of science and technology. I am an engineer myself. I've seen its impact. In higher education, when we started work on it and we worked on the reforms of higher education, reform in science and technology and engineering and mathematics was easier. Mm-hmm. It is something that we, as a part of our culture, it is pre-engineering, pre-medicine. Mm-hmm. That's the creme de la creme. So we didn't have to do anything about emphasizing it. It's already done for us. Then, since language doesn't play that big a role, we can take the best and the brightest literature, etc., in the world and bring it. And there, English comes to play as a big advantage for us, because we don't have any barrier. We can just go right into it. We did that. We've made a lot of progress in that. But while doing that, the centers of thought and learning, the one couplet that can cause a revolution, that can make grown men cry, that can, actually stun you, that always is from the heart. And the language of the heart is spoken in humanities and social sciences. And it is what connects us to our roots and the earth itself.
Do you think maybe this is an artificial divide that we've created over the years? Because if you look at the history of some of the oldest and mature universities of the world, both the humanities and sciences were being taught very closely to each other, and there perhaps wasn't emphasis on one at the expense of the other.
We don't have to go outside. We just have to go to our own history, and we just have to go back hardly 70, 80 years. If you study Halat-e-Zindagi of, let's say, Maulana Nazir Ahmad, and what they were receiving the classic education. So it was mantak, riyazi, falsafa, geographia, tib, maybe fiqh.
Precisely.
So it is all a mixture. And that is also the reason why you hire English majors by investment companies.
Sure.
So the world has not forgotten, and the core education of the classic and understanding your history and relating to it, because if you know who you are, then you can do something.
Sure.
So I think that it is our own past, and it is also the future, and it is what is being done right now in the top institutions of the world.
So let's pivot now to the nuts and bolts that a policymaker is going to be interested in. How do you regard the role of the HEC over the years? And they've been involved in some very high-profile initiatives, not least of which is sending a very large number of scholars abroad for training, a fraction of whom, but a significant fraction of whom are coming back. The regulation of the awarding of degrees by universities and colleges, and sort of rules and regulations around hirings and promotion and so on. One of the criticisms of the HEC has been that it has perhaps incentivized publications without paying enough attention to the quality of the publication. And so there's been this gaming of journals that are sort of that make up the numbers leading up to promotion in many universities. And more generally, when I've had the privilege of spending time in public universities, the ethos of learning seems to be diminished compared to where it should be. And you have a lot of people in high positions of authority who've got the numbers, but perhaps not the essence of scholarly activity. But sort of, how would you prize the HEC, and where is it going wrong? Where does it need to go?
The Higher Education Commission was formed to basically empower the universities and facilitate them to charge ahead. The entity that was to progress and to move ahead was the university. And in that case, because it was working at the national level, it could pool resources, take decisions in a hurry, identify a problem, and go ahead and implement a solution. So we went ahead and prioritized, for example, disciplines, and we said, okay, we have medicine, we have health, we have engineering, we have science, and what does it need? It needs faculty, it needs resources, it needs equipment, it needs a supporting structure. But you also need the governance systems, and you also need this ethos of learning. So it was, by necessity, had to be a sequential program. You couldn't open all the problems at the same time. So we went about it sequentially. And therefore, what happened was that you got squirts. I mean, if you're moving in a multi-dimensional space, you went along one axis and then you went on the other axis, rather than charting a path through the middle of it, which was more difficult. So the number of publications increased, and the quality wasn't that much paid attention to. Then there was a focus on quality. The entire quality framework was established using the Bologna protocol framework. The ownership of quality, the university were sensitized about fundamentally they are the owners of quality. It is their core responsibility and role. Then you also always have a tension between numbers, quality, and relevance. So there could be something that Pakistan needs that's not very publishable, but it has a big impact.
Sure.
And yet, when scholars review it, they want something substantive. The holy grail is to have something that is very, very relevant of a very, very high quality. That happens, that doesn't happen too often. So this tension exists all over the world, and it exists in all subjects, and is something that Pakistan also faced. But when you look at it from a statistical point of view, the recent study that was done on research publications from Pakistan, it said, the conclusion was that the rate of publications of the highest rated publications from Pakistan was higher than the BRIC countries. So not only was the overall number increasing, but the number of high quality publications were also increasing.
That study has been challenged severely by people who argue that perhaps the reason that those numbers are going up isn't because our education system is doing better than Brazil, Russia, India, or China, but it's because not just our individual scholars, but our journals have cracked the ranking system more successfully than other countries.
All right. Well, that's something one can never argue for or against. So
But if we do, fair enough. But if we step back, holistically, how do you think we're doing compared to some of these countries? So China recently has overtaken the US in the number of journal articles published per year. India sort of sends a vast number of students abroad for further education. Surely there's something wrong with the evidence rather than the underlying reality, right?
Hey, I was asked this question this morning as to why LUMS isn't one of the top universities of the world. So I asked them a simple question: what is the budget of a regular university in Pakistan, such as LUMS, and how does it compare to a top university of the world? So we are talking about 1,000 to 1 difference.
Sure.
Okay, and yet the playground of higher education is the world. So you compete with the world in professors, you compete with the world in publications. So we are working at a huge disadvantage. Our advantage is the 220 million people that we have. So the caliber and the quality of the people that we work with is very, very high. In this environment, we've been doing very, very well. If you look at the number of Pakistani universities that are among the top ranked universities in Asia, there has been a very significant increase. I have plotted that of Pakistan, I've compared that to India as well. We are lower ranked at this time, but in terms of numbers, there has been a very significant upward trend. We have got many good universities, but they are all concentrated in science and engineering related, technology related fields. They are not in the humanities and social sciences here. So I don't think so that we have gone that wrong. I think that if you shouldn't compare us to China. China's higher education system increases annually equal to the size of the Pakistan's higher education system.
Sure.
So, and the resources that they are putting in it makes it, basically we can't. So within our resources, we've done pretty well.
Well, let me challenge you on that with a statistic, which is that this is the size of foreign student population in the US. Pakistan has 5,800, give or take, international students in the US. India has 168,000.
Yeah.
Now, this ratio far exceeds the population ratio, the budget ratio, which suggests, and given that.
Well, you know the reasons.
Okay. No. So let me put you on the spot. Why don't you tell us what those reasons are?
Well, it's not because our people are dumber. It is because we are just simply not allowed access. There is this whole issue about terrorism and the post 9/11 scenario, and then the terrible times that Pakistan went through. We simply did not have the visas were curtailed, and we were not allowed. I know that working in the HEC, when we were sending PhD students abroad, we started out with the top European countries. And I can give you an example in Austria, where as a Pakistani, you are more likely to be asked the question that are you a PhD student than that are you a taxi driver.
Sure.
And they have done phenomenally well. And I speak that on the basis of statistics, on the basis of communication from their ministries of working with their faculty, Pakistani students did very, very well wherever they have gone. And you can check the European top institutions or America. In the US, we ran the largest Fulbright program in the world, but you still had to, even the largest program was only about less than 1,000 students. Sure. So you still have to supplement it with people going themselves.
Absolutely.
And so there the visa problem was a huge problem.
So, education could get buffeted by foreign policy.
Yeah.
But regardless, we can't get around the fact that to develop our centers of learning, we have to cross-pollinate sort of ideas and people with centers of learning around the world.
Yes.
Right? That can be in the form of global partnerships, it can be satellite campuses being established in country, or it can be students going abroad. Moving forward, where can we, given whatever capacity constraints we have or whatever the external world is, where do you think there are opportunities for us to develop this further?
There are huge opportunities, and I recently had a conversation with Tariq Banuri about this, and both of us agree that internationalization, there is a large opportunity, because we have, for example, all of Central Asia. These countries have a poorly developed research education. Kazakhstan is an exception that has top research institutions. Others do not. And English here terms becomes an advantage. So masters and PhD programs, for example. We have the entire continent of Africa. Nigeria is an English-speaking country, it's 300 million people. Certainly can be sending a huge number of students. We have definitely institutions that can compete at the international level. So there are many countries, but we as a country need to get our act together, because it is not simply that LUMS or NUST or PIAS or one of these institutions is a great institution. They are. But it's a question of the visa regime, of marketing, of the websites, and the entire experience of how we get. And I think that the sky is the limit as far as the number of foreign students that we can get in. One problem will be that the foreign students will have a very tough competition against the local students, because the size of our higher education sector is still much smaller than the demand, local demand. We're not able to satisfy that.
Sure.
So that may lead to international institutions coming in and setting up campuses, for which again then the policy regime has to be changed. The opportunities certainly do exist, but the challenges are high. Our international perception is very, very poor. We've got a long way to go before we are able to do something about that.
So let's start thinking about the future. We've got, let's say, next 20, 30 years. We've got some sort of problems that we haven't really touched upon, which include the fact that some of our public universities are deeply politicized. We have student bodies that are supported by, that have the sort of protection also of political parties. We've touched upon the sort of the gaming of promotion and so on by a class of professors. We also have sort of, we seem to be becoming culturally intolerant and narrow-minded, at least if the highlights in the news are to be believed. How do we pivot towards whatever is achievable? First of all, actually, what is achievable, and what are going to be the change leaders that will take us there?
I think that the core of this future has to be the university, and within the university it has to be the faculty. So what that means, first and foremost at a national level, is an autonomy to the university with the right structures of accountability. So you don't have universities in which the Minister of Education runs your syndicate, and the director of this is appointed by the Chief Minister and the other director is appointed by somebody else. How can a chief executive run an institution if you have messed up the governance system in this manner? Institutions of higher learning always in the world have been autonomous. That autonomy has to be respected. Then we have to provide them some more support, and we have got to have a regulatory regime that is facilitative. That's what it is supposed to be. Leave the universities alone, they will function. Hold them accountable, ask them these tough questions. Why isn't your research up to the mark? Why isn't the quality there? Why aren't you having an impact on the local industry? Or why haven't you produced a better air conditioner? Or whatever you want to ask. Hold them accountable, but let them do the work. If you are able to do this, really the sky is the limit as far as the Pakistani higher education system is concerned. We have in the past 15 years or so injected about 15 to 20,000 additional PhD. The PhD programs within the country have become robust. If our foreign policy allows us to become a part of the civilized world and we start having exchanges, you will realize that we have a lot to offer to the world and the ability to benefit from the world, because you can have the very highest technical developments taking place in AI, robotics or whatever, but you've got to be able to apply it, and you've got to have a local cohort that's able to understand that information and knowledge and make use of that. That is where the universities would come into play. So I see a very bright future if you do pay attention, and I'm not talking about a vast amount of new resources. Yes, steady increase in resources, but probably autonomy is the number one.
All right, last question. What's been the secret sauce at LUMS? It's credited as one of Pakistan's premier universities. And how likely is it, do you think, that we'll be able to create, let's say, 5 institutions of similar quality in the next 20 to 30 years?
The secret sauce of LUMS are its values. So it is merit, excellence, tolerance, and not only in name but in practice at all levels. So that is from the Pro-Chancellor, Rector, Board, Vice Chancellor, faculty. Just ruthless application of merit. You have never ever had a violation of merit in the admissions, in the graduation, in the award of grades, in the appointment of faculty, in the promotion of faculty, in any aspect of work. You do that, you've almost, your job is done. And then there is a very strong value system. We respect differences. We are going to allow people to have a different point of view, and we may not agree with them, but by golly, we will defend their right to make that statement. It's also that the head of the institution, the faculty or any, they don't have all the answers. They are not directing all the work. We did not have RISC come out as such a success story because some professors in economics or math or something got together and said, we will make this happen. We as an institution created an environment in which that thing happened. And then we supported it and appreciated it, and then it grew from its own work. So when you realize that you don't have all the answers, when your job is to create an environment, you will definitely succeed. And I think that is the secret sauce of LUMS. As far as other institutions coming up, I feel all you have to do is to address this thing. If you stop thinking, I have all the answers, I am the Vice Chancellor, I'll tell you what to do. If you say, I'm the Vice Chancellor and I'm the least ignorant of all of you, and I'm willing to learn from every one of you, every one of our institutions will become what we have.
All right. With that, thank you very much. Good luck in the next phase of your career.
Thank you.
And let's all join in hoping for a better tertiary education sector in Pakistan. Thank you.
Thanks.